All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are diving into something huge, the history of human violence. And it comes with a twist you probably won't see coming. You think you know how the story goes, right? Well, the data, it tells a very different tale. Let's get right into it. So, here's the big question. Is our world more violent than ever? I mean, it feels like a no-brainer, right? You turn on the news, you crack open a history book, and it's just this constant stream of conflict and bloodshed. It's easy to think the past was just this brutal, awful place and that things are spiraling. But what if that feeling we all have, what if it's just plain wrong? What if the numbers are telling us something else entirely?
Okay, look at this number, 2%. Just 2%. Now, according to this huge data set put together by Lewis Fry Richardson and then analyzed by Steven Pinker, this tiny little number, it holds a massive secret about war. And it's one that's going to completely flip how you think about the last 100 years or so.
Yeah, you heard that right. Get this. A whopping 77% of all deaths from war happened in just 2% of all wars. That's insane. So violence isn't spread out evenly through history like we might think. Instead, a tiny, tiny handful of conflicts, we're talking mainly about World War I and World War II, are responsible for almost all the casualties. It's like this giant statistical illusion, you know? It makes the entire 20th century look like nonstop carnage, but the reality is the devastation was super, super concentrated.
Okay, so if the big picture of war is kind of skewed, let's zoom way in. Let's go from those huge statistics down to the personal level. Because when you get right down to it, you find that violence is, well, it's often a shockingly intimate thing.
Now this quote, wow, this is from archaeologist Rebecca Ragg-Sykes, and it really gets at one of our deepest, darkest taboos. She's asking us to think about something pretty radical, something about our ancient cousins, the Neanderthals. What if an act that we see as the ultimate violation, cannibalism, wasn't always about violence? What if, sometimes, it was an act of grief, of care, maybe even intimacy? It totally forces you to rethink what's really behind an act of violence.
And you know what? This idea of intimate violence, it's not just for prehistory. It goes right into the heart of so-called civilized places like ancient Rome. The historian Mary Beard points out this amazing contrast. You've got Julius Caesar stabbed to death right out in public by his own colleagues. And then you have the Emperor Gaius. You probably know him as Caligula, hacked to pieces in a private hallway by the very men who were paid to protect him. Both murders were up close, personal, and dripping with betrayal.
So here's the key takeaway, right? Before you had guns and cannons and all that, violence had to be an up-close and personal business. There was no other way. And if you were in charge, if you were a king or an emperor, your biggest threat wasn't some faceless army miles away. Nope. The real danger was inside your own walls. It was the people you let get close. But violence isn't always just one person against another. It can be scaled up, organized, and turned into something way bigger and, honestly, much more terrifying. We're talking about huge, impersonal systems of cruelty run by the state itself. Just look at Stalin's Great Purge in the Soviet Union. This wasn't just about getting rid of his enemies. This was about systematically wiping out his own party. It's a terrifying example of how one person's paranoia can be turned into a full-blown state-run machine of terror. Just look at these numbers. They're just staggering. It wasn't just a machine for killing. It was a machine for erasing people from history. And right here, this is where we feel the human cost of that machine. These are the words of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And this quote, it just perfectly captures the psychological devastation. This wasn't just about breaking bodies. The whole point was to crush the human spirit. It's what it feels like, on a personal level, to be ground down by that kind of impersonal system.
In a similar way, the writer Frantz Fanon made this really powerful point about colonial violence. He said, it's not just a bunch of bad things that happen. A series of terrible events. No, it's the very atmosphere. It's the air that people under colonial rule have to breathe every single day. It's this constant, systemic pressure that shapes literally everything. Their laws, their psychology, everything. It's not something that breaks the peace, it is the peace. It's the foundation of the whole system.
Okay, so if violence can be this really personal, intimate thing, but it can also be this massive, systemic monster, how in the world do you fight it? Well, the most powerful answer isn't always, fighting fire with fire. Sometimes the most radical, the most effective thing you can do is the complete opposite.
Take Mahatma Gandhi and the non-cooperation movement in India. He had mobilized millions of people. He had brought the entire British system to a grinding halt. All the momentum was with him. But then, at this crucial moment, after one single violent incident in one village, he did something unbelievable. He called the whole thing off. He stopped the entire nationwide campaign just to stop more bloodshed.
And here's the crazy thing. As the historian Eric Hobsbawm points out, that single act of restraint, that was, paradoxically, an act of incredible power. Because by refusing to let things spiral into total chaos, Gandhi held onto this moral high ground that the British they couldn't fight it. It's strange to think about, but his restraint, his moderation, ended up being a bigger threat to British rule than any army ever could have been.
And that kind of brings us full circle, doesn't it? We started out by seeing how our whole perception of violence is warped by a few key stats. We've looked at how it works up close and personal, and how it can be built into these huge, faceless systems. So, what does all this messy, complicated history actually mean for where we're headed? So if those giant world-ending wars are, statistically at least, much rarer, and if the kind of open, systemic oppression we've talked about is condemned around the world in a way it never used to be, does that mean we're actually getting more peaceful, or is it possible that violence and control haven't vanished at all? Maybe they've just changed their shape.
Well, the scholar Shoshana Zuboff has a really interesting idea about this. She calls it digital dispossession. Now, this isn't about physical violence. It's not about being forced to do something, not openly anyway. It's a totally new kind of systemic control, one that works invisibly. It's all about capturing and analyzing our personal data and then using our own experiences against us to predict and control what we do next.
So what happens when the fight isn't over land or bodies anymore, but over owning the very patterns of our lives? What does it mean when true power is the ability to predict and shape our behavior, often without us having a clue that it's even happening? That right there, that is the big, unsettling question we have to face.